Tell me about the Pierce family. I guess starting with just you don't have to go into great detail, but the Pierce brothers coming to Morro Bay and how your father fits into the lineup.
Okay. Well, I'll do my best. Too bad our mom's not here because she really is the one. But our dad, Skinner Pierce, was the youngest of 10 siblings. Our grandfather had two separate families, five children, and our dad, being the youngest, was his oldest brother was 26 years older than him. So he was just a little kid, really, when the family came to Morro Bay. Our father was 7 years old when his dad passed away. So they came to live in Morro Bay, and the older brothers were making a living, and mostly at that time. He was born in 1926, so they'd already started when he was 7 years old. They were already starting in the abalone business, but he was just a little kid.
And Bill Pierce, explain Bill Pierce.
Yeah. So Bill Pierce was the oldest of the siblings, and he was from the first family.
And he was born in?
I believe he was born in 1900. And then Dutch Pierce, which was Adrian Pierce, and we all called him Uncle Dutch, and he was known by Dutch throughout his life. He was a couple years younger, so he was born 1902. These are estimates. And he is the one that had his family in Santa Barbara and started an abalone plant in Santa Barbara.
And explain Bill Pierce really starting the Morro Bay abalone industry.
Yeah, and honestly, I don't know that I could give you a verbatim, and I wouldn't want to get any of the facts wrong. He was more of all the Pierces. They were famous or infamous for a lot of things. But he was the one in the family that was like a businessman. He took things real serious. He never spent a penny that he didn't have to. He never gambled. He didn't drink. He was a curious man. Our mom, who was here as a teenager, he would come into the grocery store where she worked, and he would buy a head of lettuce, and he'd bite the head of lettuce and eat the head of lettuce as he was walking up the street. So he did very unusual things. He didn't do what the other brothers were doing. He didn't try to control them, or he wasn't bossy or anything like that. But he did. I don't know if his was a partnership that he started, because Uncle Charlie is 10, 12 years younger than Uncle Bill. And he is the one that is more close to the age of Frank Brebs, who eventually the Brebses and the Pierces kind of were at the same time working on abalone projects. But I don't really know how that initiated. I don't know if it was Uncle Dutch and him here, and then they saw that there was going to be enough of a business, and Uncle Dutch split off. I really don't know.
Tell me about your father Skinner's part in the abalone industry.
So Dad always wanted to do what his older brothers were doing, and Uncle Charlie and Uncle Duke, Walter Pierce, were considerably older than him, and they had a boat, and they were diving for abalones, and he wanted to do what they were doing. So he started out working on the boat, and he was line tending and all that. But a little kid always wants to do what the older brother's doing. So Ed could really probably speak to that more than I could, because what the progression was of Dad in the abalone industry.
Well, I'm the fifth born in our family of siblings, and
How many siblings in your family?
7 total. But I was the firstborn son, and so when I came along, I was even nicknamed the Little Prince. Just to give you an idea how it changed things was, my sisters, I always tell the same story, that they were trying to drown me in the bathtub, because before I showed up, they got to go everywhere with that. Well, they were nicknamed me the Little Prince in them days because I got to do whatever he was doing. So naturally, I grew up kind of a little bit on the special side. Didn't really know it, but I just wanted to be just like my dad. I wanted my feet to smell like his, and all of that. And so, growing up around him, he worked in the abalone diving business. Where once he started diving, he was so darn good at it, and his philosophy on life is the same one that I was raised with: is whatever you do, son, do it the best you possibly can. He was a very humble person. Never brag about what he did this day or that day, but he was constantly doing things greater than most. As being a son looking at us, just always wanted to walk in his shoes, but could barely even come close to his shadow. But being raised as a diver's son, you want to do what your father did, and so all my life I'm wanting to get there faster. I want to be old enough to go with him and work with him and stuff. And my first trips with him as a diver out of Morro Bay here, he worked for the leagues. He sold his abalones to the leagues, and he was dedicated to that. Wouldn't sell to anybody else. They had some kind of a lease thing going with most of the boats he had. He had several boats through those years, and one of them was the Pam. You were allowed to name the boat whatever, and Pam's my oldest sister and his firstborn. So, but anyway, when I was 8, I made trips with him, and I got sick like any young kid would because I ate too many pancakes, too much syrup on them that morning. But he told me to stay on the boat tonight, and one time I had to sleep on the boat down there at the dock. And then, of course, he brought me. I said, I need some seasick pills, Dad. And of course, then he brought me aspirin. Told me, here's your seasick pill. I didn't know what they were. That day, I didn't get sick. It's all up here. This is what I figured out. That and the pancakes. But since then, I haven't been sick anymore. I just don't get it. And that's
Mind over matter.
I think so. So. Yeah. So all of those years of watching my dad dive and stuff, and couldn't wait to get there. Well, as I'm getting there, I was born in '56, and my dad had his diving accident when he got bent down in Santa Barbara. He was, in those days, was going down there for better diving, where the numbers were better and whatnot.
What year was that?
1968.
68?
Yeah, when he I believe it was 68 or 69 when he actually got bent. And we were pretty sad around there, and my mom wasn't very good with big things like that happen. I mean, he was everything to us as a family, and
explain that, what happened in that accident.
Well, he was diving in a place called the Potato Patch, is what the nickname for it was, and it's a spot of water between Santa Cruz Island and Santa Rosa Island, on the west end of the islands there. And the water and the current runs from the big channel and between those two islands back and forth, and they come together and it's basically a tide rip, and it causes the water to stack up like this. Well, that's right at the change of the tide, and then it'll go one way or the other, and the current will rip so hard there that if a diver's diving in that area, it'll just rip you right off the bottom. You don't have enough lead to keep you down. And he found a spot that nobody had been on in a long time, and was picking these hubcaps, is what he called them, the great big abalones, worth a lot of money. And so Larry, my brother-in-law, was at that time was 10 in line for Dad, and I'm not sure what boat it was that he was diving on, but in those days they put all the abalones on the deck. And how they'd come back, the divers would just stay on the bottom and keep working. But unlike the way in the modern day when I got to dive. So what they did was they had a salmon ball down on the bottom that weighed 10, 15 pounds that held their line straight down, had a hook at the bottom, and the line tender would send down an empty bag to him. And then what my father would be doing was get that bag of abalones, 3 dozen abalone bags, that's the size that they had, stuff them big ones in there, as many as you could get, even a few on your body if you had to, and he would basically drag himself along the bottom back to the boat by a signal to the hose, and then he'd help him, and he'd get back to the boat, and he'd give a tug when he changed out bags and then take off. Well, what actually happened to him, the current had come up, and he could feel it, but he had that big bag with him, so that big bag was helping him stay down. And what he did was he got to the boat, and he got a new bag, and he had the empty bag, and he started off, and as soon as he did, he felt that hose pulling on him and it's dragging him on the bottom. Well, he picked a couple moving by like like you're in a river, and was taking him away from the boat and ripping along. And by the time that he couldn't stop, it just kept getting stronger and stronger. Well, it pulled him to the end of that hose, and he come up just like a cork. And he'd already been down. He was in 85 foot of water, which the divers and the line tender kind of pay attention. He had an old Timex watch that he hung right on the gear shift on that boat, and nothing more than a little fairing windshield, and that's that's the boats they were using in them days. And anyway, when he come to the top, he thought everything was good. Larry was clearing the hose, putting it on the deal, and they had a little kelp to put on top of the abalones. That's how they kept them from drying out on the decks. And then Larry said that he was dealing with the anchor or something, and he heard a thump, and there's Dad on the deck just shaking like this. And recalling it from my father after years later, whatever, talking to him, he said he couldn't see, he couldn't hear, and he just felt like he was of edge. I mean, couldn't control anything. The doctor said later, of course, it was some kind of a local nerve in your brain or whatever. One of the blood vessels or whatever was being blocked and air bubble. But anyway, the chopper out of Point Magoo came and flew out there. They Maydayed, Larry did or whoever did, and I guess it was Larry, and they flew the chopper out there and picked him up in a basket and flew him up, took him to Point Magoo and put him in the decompression chamber, which the doctor on duty at the time was the one that actually saved his life, because most people don't ever come out of those. But he kept him in there for almost 2 weeks at a pressure of 20 pounds, or 20 feet, the same pressure you at your first atmosphere at 20 feet down. But he maxed out that decompression chamber right to start with to try to squeeze those bubbles down. And when he came home to us, we didn't ever think, we'd already heard about it. This is quite a while went by, and then finally.
And how old were you?
I would have been. Yeah, go ahead.
I was 15.
Yeah, I was 12 or 11 years old. Yeah, it was hard.
And the doctors, they told our mom, it's like a man that has had a severe stroke. He's not going to walk. He's going to be, if he gets his speech back, but he's like, for the rest of his life, this is going to be a man that, if he learns to walk, if he can do that, but it's like a severe stroke, the worst stroke that you could have without dying.
Yeah.
And
but when he showed up, I mean, we were so damn happy to see him.
yeah.
But,
He was
showed
42.
up he was 42,
Yeah.
and he showed up in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
As soon as he got to the house, that was the end of the wheelchair.
Yeah.
He didn't care. If he had to crawl, he wasn't going to be in a wheelchair. And
So what happened?
well,
He rehabilitated himself.
Yeah.
He
Just
started walking uptown and doing his thing and his,
carrying a golf club
positive
with him.
mindset.
Yep. And he
Positive mindset was probably the number one thing. Never felt sorry for himself one
nope.
second.
And
Knew he had, 7 kids to take care of
Yeah.
and a wife, and
Yep. And he
he's going to get himself back to work.
Yeah. So when that happens, it kind of changes. Here's a son.
There was no PT coming to the house. And
So I was
getting him
I could swim like a fish, just the same as all my sisters as well, brothers as well. We got all swim, and my mother couldn't swim a stroke and was afraid of the water. And so my father taught us all to swim, but it kind of changed things for me. All of a sudden, my father's no longer a diver no more, and I'm still wanting to be one. And I'm diving down here in the bay, spearing fish, and the old people that I see, that used to hang out around there, they go, oh yeah, that's Skinner's son, and I kept growing up with that this great man that I'm his son. It just makes you perfect, For me, I was so proud of my dad, and he loved us all so damn much. And then I wanted to be an abalone diver. Still want to be an abalone. Well, you can't make no money at it, son. It's a tough go. So you follow what he's going to do. And he went into what he did in the off season when he wasn't diving in the later years. Hard to make a living. He worked as a equipment operator with his older brother. And so he got into the dozer business and started a business, and I started working and doing that. And I realized, and you just do whatever your dad does, kind of a thing. Or that's the way I was. And he was awesome at anything he touched. Anything he did well. Like, and I tried to do the same. Followed just behind him. I could run a dozer like crazy. My dad was a cat skinner. He was really amazing on equipment.
That's not where he got his nickname, by the way.
No.
Yeah. Well, go ahead and tell me how he got his nickname.
Yeah, okay.
You got enough film?
When he was, yeah, we have
I
enough
got
film.
hours.
So when he was a little kid, before he was 7 years old, because this was happening when they lived out at bee camp, which
Yeah.
bee
The
at
queen
the bee
bee.
mine, the queen bee,
In La Panza.
in La Panza, and he's just a really little kid, say 4 years old. And the older brothers hunted and sold quail and hides to a company from San Francisco that was called E.F. Skinner. And the E.F. Skinner truck would come on a regular basis to pick up the quail and the wildlife that the older brothers were making money off of. When the truck was coming down the road, he'd start going, Skinner, 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 and that's how they monikered him that. And the family was famous for nicknames, and
Yeah.
so it was just natural for him to have a nickname like that. But in later years, he did, drive cats and big moving equipment, and a lot of people assume that's where he got his nickname.
Yes,
Yeah.
I've actually heard that, and I was going, no, that's not why.
Yeah. So the official story, and that story came from his older brother Charlie Pierce, who
Yeah.
was 11 years older than him, and
So
knew
tell
what
me
happened.
tell me about your father's accident where he died, and kind of the irony about where he died.
Yeah. Oh, before we get there, we
Yeah.
really Ed needs to tell
Follow.
how he came back, and in 1969, what
Yes.
he achieved.
Yes.
One year-
okay.
one
You're
year
right.
after
We didn't
his-
finish that.
Well,
Yeah.
that was the part that just was the biggest lesson of all. When it's not, that my dad had this reputation. I don't know, it was a bunch of people just talking, and they just, all of a sudden you are the gunslinger of gunslingers. That he was the toughest man around. Well, my father had a no-quit attitude. Was really what he had. Besides the fact he was pretty handy with his fist, because he had to be. I mean, his brothers were all tough. They all fought in the ring. And my father, following along, so you had to be one of us. You'd be a strong man this way, that way. So he was always very proud of him holding his own. He wasn't a guy to go around and pick a fight, but he was a guy you didn't want to get in a fight with because he just wouldn't quit.
He had to finish a lot of fights because his brother's reputation before him.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's where it comes from, the
Right.
start of it. But he was a very gentle man. A lot of people got a wrong idea along the way, but that's who he was. And so when he came back to see the fortitude of this guy, just, he's not going to be a cripple. He's not going. And he loved playing golf, and Henry Rebs said the two of them, they're best friends, and he played golf with Hank and everybody. Lots of pictures of him in the old days of playing golf, but he became really good at it he's a self-taught golfer, and that's unheard of that he could be that good. But what he did from coming back from being bent like that so bad that they're telling him they can't even walk, well, he started swinging a golf club, and it felt good to him. He just kept on doing it, and then he got his swing back and his balance back. His equilibrium was the hardest part, and if you don't have your balance when it comes to the game of golf, you might as well just forget it. And that following year, he had his game together, and he went and played in the county championship, which was the biggest thing around in our area for amateurs, basically, that weren't pros, to play in. As they played in the Paso Robles, Morro Bay, and San Luis Country Club. And he played in that first year, and I believe he took second place in the first year. And the following 3 years after that, he won the championship. So that's a complete turnaround from somebody that's
Never
can't
gonna
even
walk
talk.
again.
Yes. So that's kind of it was nothing he couldn't do. I thought he was a Superman. I figured nobody's can do this much, but it was right here, and he made us believe the same thing. But there was nothing we couldn't do.
He was always, after that, a little unsteady on his feet and walked like someone that maybe had some drinks. So that was always assumed that maybe, there's Skinner Pierce, half in the bag or whatever. But his pace was a little off, and then when he stood, he wouldn't stand a certain way just to support his body. But yeah, he physically came back from that.
Yeah. So that was,
Amazing.
yeah, it was amazing. He was in an amazing business. I can tell you that for sure.
Yeah.
But
Okay, now
So-
tell me about
Yeah. Okay. Well.
his
Yep.
accident.
Yeah, in 1983, and the heavy rains in February and March, of course, washed the road away in Big Sur, like we've just seen recently, where it did it again, and they repaired it. But anyway, so he was contracted by the Negrani Construction Company because Carl Negrani knew that Skinner was a guy that could get the job. He trusted him as a friend, and he was somebody that whatever job he put him on, he knew he'd accomplish it. And so he was up there working on, I don't even know exactly what the name of the piece of equipment he was working on.
he was on a 966.
966 loader, and
Caterpillar.
and they were clearing the road to support it and build it up from the bottom, and he was working up on top. And you know, I'm not going to be good telling this story.
It's okay. I'll finish it for you, DJ. What he was doing the day of the accident is he finished lunch, and right after lunch, he went back to work early because there was a school bus full of kids that were trying to get home or get
It was
through.
Good Friday.
Yeah, and
Easter weekend.
Yeah, and so when he seen them, they were stacked up and they were stuck over on the other side. So he's going to go ahead and clear debris has been trickling down, and they're supposed to have a spotter up there with a horn, and it lets him know if anything's coming, so he get out of the way. And it was all caught on film, so this is why I know this is accurate. I've seen the film and stuff with like 15 pictures taken of what had happened, and he was just probably 20 yards from being clear of everything. The hugest landslide in the history of California on the coast came down on it. And what it did was it caught the front of the bucket and rolled him all the way. And he rode it out, but to no avail. He went all the way to the bottom of the ocean, and that's where he still is today. So it was really a sad, for us. But
Ironically,
And ironically,
Yes.
as the crow flies,
Yeah.
it is just over the hill with our oldest known
Uncle.
ancestor.
Yeah. Uncle Bill.
Yeah, it was in the ocean there too.
Lost in a diving accident in walking gear, by the way.
Yeah, walking out.
Walking gear meaning the hard hat diving,
Yeah.
25-pound lead on each foot, and walking that. And that's an interesting part of talking about my father and what kind of a diver he was, and whatever, like I said, he was good at it, but he stayed in the diving business for a long enough time that there was stories he told about his days in walking gear, and everything had meaning to him when he told his stories, which was what we loved the most about him. The stories at the round table, meaning when my father came home to sit down at the table, we were all sat down and we were as quiet as a mouse to listen to a story, because all of his stories had meaning. They meant something. And he told the stories. Of course, I'm all ears listening to everything he's saying because I knew that, and he was a great storyteller as well. But he told a story about his diving. I said, "How come you're not still in walking gear, Dad? With the hard helmet and stuff." And he says, "Well, the last time that I dove in walking gear was a day he didn't have a line tender, and he had to pick up somebody to tend line for him, and he picked up a couple of guys from the Circle Inn or something, some known guys, but they didn't have much experience, but he didn't care. He just wanted, and he got up the coast up there, and he went ahead and went in on. They used to walk down a ladder off the boat, and walked in. It's fairly shallow there, and he was going in there to work, and before he got in the water, he had just replaced his gasket on his helmet. And anybody in walking gear, the helmets go on, and then they do a quarter turn, and then there's a little wing nut comes up like this, and you put the wing nut on. That tells you're down tight and sealed. But this new gasket and these two greenhorns that were on the boat tapped him on the helmet, said, "You're all good," and they didn't even get the wing nut up. So the helmet wasn't completely sealed. Sealed enough, though, that it was fine with it. And he was walking along, and the next thing he knows, he looks in there, and he tells the story to me. There's a cave in there, and he puts his head in there, and he's peeling abalones out of this kind of a cave, and then he's shallow enough that a wave comes, and it kind of causes him to roll upside down. And as it does, his helmet catches on the rock and turns his helmet like this, and all of a sudden it releases. There's your air. It's going shh, and he grabs it and pulls it back, but it's too late. It's not sealed, and the water starts filling up to his helmet. I said, "What did you do, Dad?" And he says, "The only thing I could think of was start walking for the shallow." He says, "I signaled the guys. They don't know what the heck's going on." Yeah. So he walks, and this is, I don't know, by luck or by whatever, there's a shallow reef rock that comes up. So he crawls up the rock. They now look over and see his head's out of the water. They know he's in trouble. So they immediately start dragging him back.
So now they're pulling him back into the water.
Yeah, into the water. So instead of taking the boat and pulling up there, and so they're dragging him back, and and he gets back, and I said, "Well, what did you do? How'd you make it, Dad?" You know, he gets back to the boat. They hang him up underneath the ladder, trying to pull him on the boat. And now he's pretty pissed, you know, and he wants to deal with these guys. Well, imagine the view that I'm getting, because he made every story feel like you were there with him. That's why it sticks, you know. And he said, "Well, I tried to chase him around with my abalone iron with my 25 pounds on each foot, and the helmet off now." And they ran from him, and all the way around the boat. He could never catch him. Yeah. Time he cooled off, it was all fine.
So
but
he said, with the walking
he said, "No more walking gear," and that's when he went to the next phase. And he's probably the few people that ever went through the diving business in the early days that actually walked in walking gear. And that was the end of that. And then he shifted, and he went to the dry suit and a full face mask that pumped your air into that mask. Mm-hmm. And that was a big change.
Okay, once again, Addie, tell me about, your father was the only Pierce brother who went through all the changes in diving gear for abalone.
And stayed in the abalone business for the longest. Uh-huh. He didn't change. He loved the water, loved the diving, and I found out through the years, you know, when I got the opportunity, what he was loving about it. It was something new every day, you know. So as a young boy, watching him grow up, I wanted to be just like him. I wanted to do the same thing. So as I watched very closely and listened to every story that he had, because they all had meaning. But I was wondering, "Dad, why are your fins so short?" Well, in those years, he went through the walking gear first, and he said, "No more of that. That's way too slow." Then he went to the dry suit, and the dry suit was real similar, but he wasn't really kicking. They didn't have what we had when we started diving in the modern day diver. He went to a dry suit, and he had Voigt fins. There were Navy fins in them days, real heavy. The fins weighed a ton. I tried putting them on because I'm a little guy at the time. Hell, they're so big, they fall off my feet. But I said, "Dad, why are your fins only about this long?" And they looked just like somebody that was wearing the surfing type of, body surfing type of fins, a little short one. Well, he cut them off because he was walking on them most of the time. The conversion from going from walking gear to diving, his abalone bags, once you get a full bag, you basically had to walk across the bottom to get back to the boat to get a new bag. Save time with the tender sending down a line to you. But then he went to swimming gear, which was a wetsuit, and the 3/8 thick is called a commercial wetsuit, and that's the gear that I went to. When I got my opportunity, went to, but most of the divers are using. But we were swimming, and we were using pretty, fins that would really kick because we were covering so much ground. But he basically swam, and he spent a lot of time in the water every day. But it was amazing that he converted over and continued to do. He was the way I was diving abalones when I finally. This is years and years later. This is how many years later? Be some 20 years later. and finally get my opportunity. It was like it was my dream to be a abalone diver. It was that missing piece, for me. But I didn't know how prepared I was being in those early days. The things that my father always had meaning to whatever he was doing. And as little kids, of course, he made sure that we are all really unbelievable swimmers. We love the water. If there was a pond, it looked like chocolate soup. It didn't matter. We would get in that water. We didn't care what cutoffs or whatever. We'd get it, and we just would love to swim. Well, he taught us right off the start was how to rock walk, and what it was teaching us was two things: is to stay calm in the water, and you need to have a calmness that you never panic underneath the water. A lot of divers, sport divers, and others have lost their lives due to that panic part, wrapped up in the kelp and these different things. Mindset. He taught us this by a game that he used to started us doing, and it was you pick the biggest rock that you can find on the bank of a pond or whatever piece of water, and you walk in the water until your lips are just get your last breath. Take a good one and make sure the rock's heavy enough that it'll hold you down, and then you walk across the pond. It teaches you a couple things. You realize that if you try to walk real fast, you'll burn up all your oxygen before you ever get there. And the name of the game is coming out of the water with the same rock that you started with. You can't swim with it, you have to walk. But it teaches you to slow down everything and do that. Well, I got pretty darn good at it. So did my younger brother, got good at it. But it was teaching us that very thing. And so when you finally become a diver, you're real comfortable in the water in any situation. If your air gets cut off, which I've had that happen to me and had to bail out before. It happened plenty of times to our father.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
because of faulty equipment mostly.
Yes, mostly.
And line tenders.
Line tenders and different things. So you count on yourself to get out of those things, and to be able to do that, you have to have that kind of a mindset. So as we've kind of not fast forward, but how this all came to be for me in the early days was I was out of work at the time, and I was down shooting pool at Happy Jack's in Morro Bay, and in comes Mike Radden, and he had his sweatpants on.
And about what year was this?
This would, once again, it would be about, I think the early, it would be in the late 80s is what it would be, 89, I'm thinking, somewhere in there. And Mike said, it was like I hadn't seen him in a long time, but he came right over there and was talking to me. I was going, God, I know this guy as one of the new modern day heroes, but besides him and Kenny Carnahan,
yeah,
we're the only real abalone divers left, or the new generation of them. And what are you doing, Mike? He says, I just come in from a trip, but I lost my line tender. He says, you want to go? He says, you want to go to work for me? And I couldn't believe it. I says, you got to be joking. I'm thinking that he's asking me, and I go, he says, it's perfect for you. And I said, don't even ask again. When do we start? Tomorrow morning. And so that was go home and get back. And the next morning I was with Mike Radden going to Halama, where I've heard a million stories from my father of picking abalones before and stuff. And we went down there on his boat that he had at that time, which was the Allison Way, 26-foot Radden. And from that day forward, I was hooked. I mean, big time. I was hooked, and I was back in the diving business, or I had my opportunity.
Yeah.
And Mike says, you are so perfect for this. He says, this is you. He says, the crazy part is I idolize your father as I would only wish I could be as good as him. And Mike was amazing in the water. He swam like a sea otter, and he would never wear out. He just keep going and going and going. And so I was his line tender, and the two of us as a team, we were unstoppable. Mm-hmm. I was strong. I pulled, and I wanted to do good. And then it only took a few months, and Mike says, you're going to be a diver. And I'm thinking, can this dream really be coming true? And it did. It came around with Mike's help. helping me financially wise to build a boat. And he always, worked it out to where he was getting the better end of it. But for me, I felt I was getting the better end of it because I had the opportunity.
Mike was a good businessman.
He was a really good businessman, but that's how I got started.
Tom Weiss, when I spoke with him about the last Pierce Brothers fishery processing plant in Morro Bay, said that it was 1986 that started.
The permit.
Do you remember, DeeDee?
See, I'm lost with the dates. See, so if it started in '86, I hadn't got my permit to dive yet, but I'd been working with Mike for a year already.
I think Tom's a little early.
Okay.
It sounds like it to me too, but
yeah, I trimmed the first abalone and Henry pounded them, and I don't think it was 1986.
Okay. What would you say, DeeDee?
I would say it was closer to 1990,
Okay.
1989,
Okay.
1990.
Okay. Well, good.
Yeah.
It's good to be
Yeah.
accurate.
well, to verify, I know it was I was diving for a straight 4 years of diving is what I got in before they actually shut us down. So if you can backtrack from that, I worked for Mike for no more than a year as a line tender slash. We did abalones, we did sea urchins on the north,
And even when Mike was doing it, there were no places, you had to take them to Santa Barbara to process them.
Yes, and sell them. And
Yes.
it was kind of Mike said, well, we got to start processing our own. And I said, well, why not? Let's I'll check on it, see what are we going to call ourselves? Of course we're going to call us Pierce Brothers Abalone. So basically, none of the uncles or anything had a problem with it. So we reopened it as Pierce Brothers Abalone. And
which turned out to be, as I understand it, about the last processing plant in California.
It was.
that was stake operation.
It was.
You betcha.
Yeah.
Some of the guys that were
It was
left.
the first and it was the last.
Yeah, and the only ones that were on board with us, before the shutdown, was they were taking the abalones, punching them out, washing them, and freezing them whole to sell to the Oriental markets.
So
We were the last steak makers, and we were selling all across the country to Chicago, to Vegas, north to the fancy restaurants in Carmel.
San Francisco.
And my sister, if you was ever had the opportunity to watch her trim abalones, it's not just an art. I mean, I'm good with a knife, and I could help her tune her knives and whatnot. The same knives that she trimmed with and learned from.
LMA Dillard.
Exactly, and she was amazing. They would the tables that we worked on. This processing plant was something that my brother Joe, he was carpenter at the time. We hired him to build this thing. And it was a great idea. It was kind of Mike's idea to make it mobile so we could take it and go process even in Santa Barbara if we wanted to. But there at the end, we were buying I was diving, selling my abalones to my own company, and I picked up Tom as a partner to help manage it. He was good at managing it, and he was hardworking, so he was perfect for that. And he'd come down and pick up our loads so I didn't have to bring them all the way home. And I could go right back out. I had my suitcase.
You're down in Channel Islands?
Yes, and I had my suitcase phone, and I talked to the other divers and buy loads from them, and we were buying from about 10 other boats and processing, trying to bury my sister and Henry Brebs and Tom. Tom would be punching out, and then it'd go from there, and we'd fill that whole place up full of abalones. But the tables and stuff were built with the same design, basically, as the old tables that were monsters in the leagues and in Chuck sites. They were fiberglassed, and then they were gel coated white on top of that, and they have a little piece of wood, a trim board, so they won't slide off the tables.
Needs like a shuffle board thing. You
Yeah,
pull
with a
them
big
in,
stick
big
to pull them.
stick.
So the abalones, after they're punched, rinsed, and all like that, and put down onto the tables, they got to get flat in order to do them.
Yeah.
But in the spot where DeeDee would stand, she would wear out the gel coat on the top, because you would hear this little click, 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 click,
Yeah.
and she could spin an abalone and go around, and it looked like you used a buffer.
I have my original knife that came from Cornette's. Remember the Cornette store?
You got to get it. Show it to them.
Well,
I mean, even I tried to even
Well, that,
copy what you did, but I could never get. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm always taking too much,
Yeah.
but you could tell if my sister had done it or it was somebody else. It was just like somebody ran a buffer around there, and there's a whole.
So go ahead.
All right.
and
So, 1974, when I got, put on the team, so to speak, and Ella Mae Dillard, who was longtime abalone trimmer, she'd probably been trimming and packing abalones for 40 years, was going to retire, and she wanted to train somebody, so I was it. My dad went down to Cornette's in Morro Bay, bought me these actual knives, 1974. And they probably cost 79 cents, maybe $1.29, something like that. But they are the perfect steel to hold that edge, to be able to trim an abalone. Anybody that's ever held an abalone realizes that there's a thin film over the whole abalone. And of course he's got the big lip that goes around the outside. Well, after the abalone's punched out and he's put up on the table and some of the muck is taken off of him, they have a big slicer, like a meat slicer, with no guard on it, and they take the top off of it, and they take the foot off of it, and then they put it on the table, and it's ready for. They also take it and run it around because the abalone has a big lip that sticking out, big
Black.
curly lip, the black, and he'll run that around on this open guarded, slicer that's going around. Then they put it on the table. Now it's ready for the up trimmer. The up trimmer is the next person, and this knife, you can see the curvature of it is so much different than the side trimming knife. Side trimming knife is going to be straight, and the up trimming knife is going to have this curvature on it. And what that does is gives you the ability to, when it's on the table, if I had an abalone, I could show you. You hold on to that abalone and you start at the butt end of the abalone, and you do it, well, where Ed's talking about the click, click, click. Each time that hits, it bends that knife to where it has to hit the table. And so you take a piece and it comes off, and you're turning the abalone and click, 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 click. It goes all the way around. With a side trimming knife, you pick the abalone up in your hand and you're holding it like this, and you're taking the trim off the side of it.
The blacks, yeah.
Yeah, or brown or whatever's on there. But without this up trimming knife, is all you're going to have is a tough abalone steak that's going to break around the edge.
It cracks.
It
when you
cracks.
pound it.
Yeah. And a side trimming knife cannot take that off properly without wasting a third of the abalone, because the top of the abalone is cupped over, and then it has this
Shape.
curvature to it, and then it's, so if you tried to do it with a side trimming knife, you would just waste a third more of the abalone. And especially at the price abalone is now,
Yeah.
you want to make sure that you got a good side trimmer. I mean, an up trimmer. And the up trimming was the job that nobody wanted. The pounders or the other people working in the shop might at times pick up a side trimming knife and come over and help out. But nobody wanted to pick up an up trimming knife.
Nope.
You're going to lose fingers if you don't know how to do it.
Yep.
And the blade is like a razor. It's like you would shave yourself with. And nobody touches somebody else's knife. I had a rock, a special rock, and a special stone that I sharpened them on, back and forth.
Yep.
But,
Piece
and
of
it
jade.
was a musical piece of, the pounding was a musical part, because it was the rhythmic pounding, and the up trimming was rhythmic. And those were the two musics that happened in the abalone shop.
Yep.
But the side trimming, it wasn't that it was easy, and Edith Pierce made it look, she was just such a professional. She could just trim one so fast, it's like, and I had to keep up with her. So I had to get those abalones, and I had to up trim them. She's standing over there waiting for one. And, sometimes she'd be lighting another cigarette. She gave me a lot of leeway. She was so kind to me, where someone else, she'd be on the table like this, and you knew.
Yeah.
But she'd turn around and take a drink of coffee, and she'd give me a chance to catch up. I got pretty good. But, yeah, and officially, with Ed having the Pierce Brothers abalone shop processing plant, him and Tom, so it did make me the last official abalone trimmer for commercial. That's abalones that came out of the wild.
That's true. Very
You know,
true.
they were the ones that were raised in the farm, and as I understand, they didn't even really trim them. They're so young
They,
and tender, they just brush them off and they're good to go.
yeah.
And they pound
And
the
you're
whole abalone.
also the last people selling real steaks.
Yeah, real
Yes.
steak. The
Yes.
wild abalone.
Yep.
Yeah,
That's true.
yeah.
How does that feel to you guys? You know, knowing your history, your
Yeah.
ancestry.
Yeah.
You know, your ancestors started the Morro Bay abalone fishery, and now here you are, and you were the last ones. How does that feel for you guys? I mean, it's
Well,
got to be, you got to have to be conflicted.
It's yeah. There's no regrets, and it's a wealth. It's like our gold mine. It's the gift that keeps on giving, because we have the stories, we live the stories. Our dad was our YouTube, our Instagram, our Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
It was living Technicolor right in at our table, you know. And a lot of people have their stories, and it's wonderful. Every family has their stories.
For me, you know, I try to be a positive thinking person, and for a time there I was almost to the point where I was mad at the world, you know, because it was hard for me because it took so long, and then when I finally got the opportunity, it's like the sky opened, it was meant to be, and and I was doing what I was born to do, you know, type of deal, and loving every minute of it, and every day the things that were my father was bringing back to the table were the same things that I was bringing back to the table, just simple things like, I mean, the difference between his bars and my bars are the changes, the different changes, the things that we did differently, but it was all the same. And teaching the things that he taught me was how to find an abalone. You had to be kind of somewhat of a hunter. You could swim through a lot of bottom and never really get into abalones that were fat enough to be legal. Because abalone has to eat well. There's places where abalones, you'd find beds of them in there, but they weren't growing because they weren't getting a good amount of feed. And then you would go to an area, you could recognize that, and that's like tracking an animal. So actually, you got to think like an abalone, so to speak. But my father, these are one of these bars. This bar is DeeDee's gift. This was one of his first bars, and then he built another one. The only difference is these are made out of a special stainless steel that I think it was Army surplus stuff that one of our uncles, Uncle Cougar, had up at his little shop, and my dad built them right there at the shop. He wasn't much of a welder, but he figured it out, and they have a kelp knife on them for, you know, cutting kelp when you're coming back to the boat and dragging big loads, and that's where you're diving, is right in the thick kelp, but real similar. But he changed them up a little bit for fitting back into tighter holes and whatnot. And then you compare these two bars with the bar that I use. This is you can see the similarities. These have stainless steel ears on them, but this is the only weapon, only tool that you are, as an abalone diver, have underneath the water. Everybody will say, "Oh, you see sharks?" Yeah, I see sharks. I'm aware of them. I know they're there. I don't. It'd be like going into a bad place. You've got to be aware of your surroundings. Keep me out of trouble. But these bars, as they're being different, this here is what Mike was using, this style of bar, and I got the idea from him. This is a leaf spring off a Jaguar car, older one, and they keep their spring in them, and they really help when you're measuring abalones and prying them off without hurting the abalone, because they're a known bleeder. They just continue. What do you call it? Hemophilic.
Yeah. And
but they
milk
bleed,
out.
and so in the water, if you cut an abalone, he's going to be weaker to start with. But I would try not to even measure an abalone pry him off that wasn't already, your eye gets to judging them after a while, and you only pry the ones that are going to be close. But this bar really helps that, and I would measure through thousands in a day. Unlike the early divers were more or less, if they see a big one, boom, and they throw it into the bag and then remeasure them when they get to the deck. and so therefore they'd have maybe a few shorts or whatever, or bar cut ones, and they would take those home to eat. The bar cut ones, and for me, I was measuring through hundreds a day, every day. Spend 6 to 8 hours in the water, and doing a lot of swimming. Hose is 600 foot long, and I have to basically have a line tender to feed me a hose and help me back as I'm coming back. But we also had float bags that rolled up onto our bags, which was one of the best ideas they ever came up with. So you just take your regulator off and blow air into your bag, and it would be like a flag under the water. You could leave your bag there with the float bag up, and you could see it, and you just burn out this way, and then you burn out that way, and you get 4 or 5 abalones, you stick them to your chest, and you swim, back to the bag, drop them in the bag, and that way you're covering all the ground really good. So the differences from the fins, what I spoke of earlier, that my father was walking under the water. It took a long time but you could see how that was working well for him. He didn't need a float bag. He wasn't spending that much time spinning out. He was in there working in an area, and then when he'd leave, he was picking just the big fat ones, because they didn't like 7 3/4 inch, which is the legal commercial size. To be a thin little abalone, they couldn't get no pounds per dozen. As DeeDee was speaking of earlier about her knife, it was that's the art, is to be able to take off that thin little layer of they called it in them days waste. Hell, when we were when we were doing it, we were taking them and trying to grind them up, and make burgers.
Yeah,
to
they were trying
use
to
everything.
use the trimmings, and
Yeah.
even during Chuck Seitz' time, they were trying to repurpose,
Absolutely.
grind it up and make patties and that
But
type of thing.
these 2 bars here are my father's original bars, and one being a little older than the other, and this was his original measuring device. They all have SP on them, Skinner Pierce, and this is his official bar that he used for measuring. Mine looked a little different than this. I didn't bring it today.
Would be up on the deck.
This is on the deck.
Yeah.
So that they didn't have. He wasn't going to be down there on the bottom. All of his abalones are going to be a half an inch over the bar anyway, in most cases. But I was constantly measuring through short beds of abalones that were coming on like crazy. And in the same place that I'm diving, I was also competing with sport boats with 40 to 50 divers on them that were overnighters, and their bar is only 7 inches. That's a big difference when you're speaking of a commercial abalone to a sport size.
Yes.
And the sad thing that I would find when they would move out, and I'd be diving over here, and then they'd move away, because I know they're not as efficient as I am or whatever. I could find them back up underneath a rock and like that. Would find fish down there eating abalones
All
that
the
had been
dead ones
cut
that
wrong.
they killed.
Yeah, that they killed because they didn't have the right kind of bar. They would use a screwdriver if they had one, and they didn't know how to pry them off. And being bleeders, the ones that weren't, if they bled at all, the rock crabs would be on them in a second. And so to properly take one off, if he misses the bar, you put him back and make sure he sticks. Don't just throw him to the side, because
Your crop for next time.
Yes, and so we were actually managing the abalone and policing them at the same time. We could tell if somebody was in there that wasn't permitted. You bet, it's like robbing a bank or being some kind of a child molester. That's how we would treat them. I mean, anybody that was in. So when they shut us down, it was a hard thing for us, a hard thing for me. And it basically broke my heart when they told me that I couldn't be a diver no more. And they promised us when the day that they were going to have the big meeting up in Monterey, we all need to go. And we were, I belonged to the Abalone Association, which was just a group of guys that had permits. And by the way, that's how I got my permit to begin with. Was they had that door opened up like another good thing happening. All these things happening great, and getting back with Mike Radden and diving with a legend, working with him, and learning the new way of business and all of the smart thinking. And it was one of his ideas, and that was passed on and incorporated into an idea with Fish and Game to pass a rule or a law that we will put less divers in the water if we can lessen the permits that are out there. And so the idea was, and that's what gave me the opportunity to be a diver, was you could buy 2 permits. If you bought them from somebody else that made it legal to sell them, you had to make the deal with that particular diver. Well, there was old divers that went on to another fishery because they got too old or whatever, and they couldn't keep the permit unless you had landings to prove that you were actually still active in the thing. So I made a deal with 2 different divers that Mike already knew. They were older guys that were burnt out and had bad shoulders and had been bent and whatever. And I paid $15,000 to each one of those. And then I took those 2 permits and turned them over to Fish and Game. They gave me back one with my name on it. And that's the day I started.
And you still have that permit?
Yes, I still have the permit.
So, once again, how did it feel to be a diver, and how did it feel to have that kind of taken away from you?
Like I said,
Heartbreaking.
it was, for me, they asked me that very question, a news guy, a couple of months into it, and I was trying to finish paying off my boat. I had every egg in that same basket. All of my finances were all put into the to the processing plant and my boat and my livelihood. And when they took it away with a promise that it would be no more than 2 years, all we need to do is study the abalone to make sure it's a viable resource and business. And it was their decision-making process. They had, I know this now, I was pretty naive at the time to actually believe it. I wanted to believe it, and I said, there's no way. We are the cleanest form of fishery in any, if you compare us to any other fishery, commercial fishery. We didn't catch another kind of fish that we weren't supposed to and kill them. We hand-picked everything. Plus, we were reseeding the beds. We were the new modern day thinking fishermen that were being called rapers and pillagers. That was hard. Those are based on half-truths and misinformation.
Tell her about how when the abalones are on the boat and they milk out and then you release the
This
the
is
sperm.
what they wanted, everything that we was trying to explain to them that we knew for a fact, and all it needed from them is you had to prove to them that we had people that went through college and had a degree in marine biology. It didn't take a rocket scientist to figure it out. The place that never had abalones, from testimony that I got from my older uncles that were still alive at the time, Uncle Duke and Uncle Charlie, that were all divers out in the Channel Islands, they said there was never any abalones to speak of, enough to even make a scratch out of on the backside of San Miguel Island. And that was the #1 place that I dove. Those beds there were the most healthy live abalone, just literally thousands and thousands. And we know for a fact, and we knew that then, and they would not, was falling on deaf ears because they said, oh, well, you don't have documentation, you didn't do this, did that. But they, without the permission of the rest of them, they first seeded these beds. Even before I started diving, they seeded them, did a seed just to see what would happen. They turned on and completely went crazy. Then, as I was a line tender on Mike's boat, and we were doing abalone, one day I was putting in abalones in the live wells, because we had live wells. The old divers never did. They all put them on the deck. Well, I said, what happened, Mike? I thought I spilt the milk out of the ice chest, because the water just turned milk cloudy. You couldn't even see in the water. Usually it's clear as heck, because you have these scupper holes. As soon as you take off to move your boat, the water all goes dumping right back out. And we're anchored or tied off to the kelp, right in the heavy parts of the kelp bed, 40, 50 feet. What was happening, Mike explained to me that they were spawning. Whenever you get the water temperature right and you put abalones that close in proximity, they'll go off and spawn. All of that seed was being dumped right back out into the water. We could not prove that. The divers knew it. And that place came and went off where there was never even abalones, even between Santa Rosa and San Miguel Island. started a whole new bed of abalones, healthy, fast growing. And that's what we were leaving behind. And because they wanted to study them. So the people that were studying them, when you're given a job to be a person that studies, you really don't want to find an answer. Trust me, you're getting paid to study them. They're out of business once they got the study done and found the answer.
Yeah.
So this has been how many years since it's closed? With that promise was not, was basically a lie. All of those things I let go a long time ago about knowing that it's, the possibilities and stuff. You can't live on dreams. But what I do have is I had that window, when the sun shined, and it gave me the opportunity to do what I felt like I was born to do. It did. It broke my heart when they closed this down, and that was the end of it. End of a time. But we, as DeeDee said, we have the memories, and we tried. For me, the most important part wasn't making making myself rich. It was something that I wanted to be able to see my grandkids be able to do. I took my daughter when she was 8 years old out on the boat, and she was fishing every day. Where's the bait, Dad? I says, you don't get no bait. You're catching dinner, the jig. So of course I had to pull the little trick, and went on down there. I seen that jig going up and down. I got an abalone, a legal one, and when it came down, I went and I hung it on, and I pulled on the line a couple times, and then I went out and circled up and come up on the other side of the boat, and I watched that. Oh, I got something. I don't know what it is. And at the time, Lorne Montgomery was my line tender, and he was watching. Well, what do you got, Crystal? Is it pulling? And she pulled it up. I caught an abalone. She was so excited. She was jumping around. She thought she caught her first abalone,
Aww.
And so that was a great day, a good memory, and fun stuff that led to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing.
And we are a family of storytellers, and Dad was, passed that down. And my son was only 3 months old when we lost my dad. But he's 38 now, and he practically feels like he knew him because we never stopped the storytelling. And all the Pierces have rich stories, but the abalone industry and have a lot to be thankful for. But I think our gift is that we do have those memories and those stories, and they stay with us. And it's too bad that the abalones, the possibility that the industry could come back. I'm ready to go in there and trim some abalones, or to show the next generation how to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I kind of went with it after that. It's hard for me to even look out at the water, having to sell my boat, not being able to keep it. Never got a penny for the old processing plant that we built and did so well with, and we moved on. But somebody said something. Well, what about you can still dive up there in Point Arena or above there, above San Francisco, which has always been closed. And I said, we could, and so we began taking family trips and big ones, and I started right in where I kind of left off. You're
talking sport
Albion.
diving.
sport diving, yes. And I love to do it anyway. I love the water. So does all of our family. And the first trip with family, I took my daughter Crystal, and she was 9 then, and paddled out on a ocean kayak and paddled out through the surf. And of course, my brother, he's a worrywart, and he was saying, "Don't do it, Ed. Don't do it." And I says, "My daughter's fine. She'll follow me." We paddled right out through the waves and out of sight, and around the corner, and found a little cove. And to watch her pick her first abalone was pretty amazing. And then to paddle back in with her shoulders back up the river, and 4 great big abalones in her hole, amazed them all. And I says, he says, "No, you picked them, Ed." I says, "Nope." She says, "I picked them, Uncle Joe." She was so
That's
proud.
free diving, no
That's
air.
free diving. And,
And you
pretty
learn to
amazing.
do it the right way. You don't kill
Yep.
abalones while you're down there. You
Right.
take them off the right way. Yes, but we're holding our breath. Well, learn how to do it the right way, or don't
Yep.
even get in the water.
Yep. Yeah. So it's something that's almost became part of us, part of our blood or whatever. But boy, I sure miss it.
Yeah.
Miss the heck out of it. But I guess everything happens for a reason. Back to all of that.
Yeah.
But I think my father was probably the best mentor that we could ever have, but he didn't just teach
Definitely.
us. He didn't just teach us those things. All through life, he was teaching us balance about yourself, about life, and even the abalone industry. If you're a farmer and you're raised as a farmer, farming's what you know, and you take care of your crops, and they take care of you. And diving for us, in a small town growing up, everybody knew us as fishermen. They knew us that we grew up with the Frenches up the road. They were fishermen, and they still kept on fishing even after they lost their father in an accident. They still, it's in your blood, something. And
Yeah.
for them, by decisions made from people that don't even are not even a part of the coast, politically wise, to make a big voice and say, "Oh, these guys are raping and pillaging," it's not the truth. It never was. And I always, I'm constantly trying to tell that to the public, and that, and whether it changes their mind or they're just are not educated on the fact. The modern day fisherman is a smarter person. You learn a lot, and I've learned a lot through those years, and it was good memories, though, Dee.
The best.
The best, the best for us. Yep. Did
Thank you, Lori.
Did I miss anything?
No B-roll.
Well, it almost feels good to talk about it. You know, it's kind of like some of those things that we talk about it in happy ways. You know,
Yeah.
one of the things that that I can always, you know, certain things that somebody would say a lot that stick in your mind. One of the things that sticks in my mind was when we were out there, Mike and I diving. We were all I knew for a fact that I was diving with working with one of the best divers of his time.
At that time.
At that time, and I had the great opportunity of diving. Also diving off of my boat, and if you're split diving and you got two divers on your boat, you know, he's working everything from the anchor line left and anchor line right. And I had the great opportunity after getting my permit, the opening, because I got my permit and I got it in the closed month of July. And so my first diving thing, I'm thinking, boy, I'm just going to go down here. I've been tending the line. This is going to be easy. And I had Mike on the boat. He wanted to make the first trip with me on the boat that I built, the Crystal D. So he goes out there, and he flat kicked my butt. I mean, he was double bagging me back to the boat, and Bruce
A
Flood,
little peanut.
you know, yeah, and he was going, "You're going too slow," and I'm thinking, "Are you just picking the fat out of it?" He was just, but I learned, I knew then I was going too slow. I was being so picky. I was looking at every abalone, and he had an eye for it. He just going boom, and he knew where the fat ones would be and like that, and he just flat kicked my butt. And after that, as I got better and better and better, I learned, you know, through those same things that I remembered from the round table where the fat ones are at, and you get an eye for it. And you know, swimming through abalones that couldn't, he was wanting to do what I was doing in those early days, and I recognized then. But the day that I got to dive, and for almost a week with Kenny Carnahan, was the best stories that I've ever heard about my father, about his younger days, how he grew up Roadrunner or one of them.
Have a Corvette?
No, it wasn't the Corvette. George had
George
Lee
had the Corvette.
Yeah, but he wrecked that too, by the way, or his brother Jack or whatever. I don't know. But I know this story because he took off. My dad just had come in from diving, and Gary Pierce was with him. They were walking up, and they seen, and he knew he had gotten whatever drafted, and he was supposed to go in, and And he says, Kenny, you're driving. We're going south. And he jumps in the car, and Kenny said, I was on top of the world driving Skinner Pierce and Gary Pierce south, and they ended up all the way in Tijuana. And he said, the highlight of my life, I'm with the best of the best. And he did that before he went off to Nam. You know, done this good.
Here's a question I wanted to ask you that I didn't get in is, first of all, Eddie, I want you to look at DeeDee while I'm talking.
Right.
I'm actually getting a side shot of so that I can use them as B-roll when DeeDee's saying something.
Oh, okay. I got you.
But okay, I'm done with that now. How many abalone divers would you say were in existence in the 1980s and in the 1990s? I've got Steve Rebuck. I asked him this question too, and I think he said that by the 1990s when they were starting to let you buy permits, there was kind of local guys, 6 or 7 Central Coast area, Santa Barbara.
Well, before the 2-for-1 thing came out,
right?
Your only hope then was to put in the lottery, and the only way that they would put in the lottery for something if somebody had lost their permit by not renewing it, or whatever, went on to move on to another fishery or went into the sea urchin.
Yeah.
Then when the law passed, I was just had started in there, and when that passed, Mike says you got to get one, and Mike was the orchestrator of that. He knew exactly which guys were wanting to get rid of them, and even asking Mike at the time can you get me a few abalone so I can renew my permit, because they knew at some point in time they'd be worth something. But at that time, and that was when I first started, there was 250 permits out there. And that was the number. They weren't going to ever,
So you're talking about 89, 90?
When I first started in business.
Okay,
and
well, Steve was saying that there were it was down to 6 or 7 local divers
that were
really actively diving.
There was recorded, because we also got the numbers, because as a buyer, we knew, because we had to give every one of those receipts to the Fish and Game so they could document how many we actually were taking.
Right.
So all of these other permits and stuff, what was calculated, we knew for a fact that out of all those 250 so-called permit holders were made up the Abalone Association, California Abalone Association, which I belong to. Then we were taking seed money out of our permits, and we had a pile of money in a bank under our name as a California Association for reseeding, but we weren't allowed to reseed. That was the other thing they stopped us on. They knew, and they were smart enough, they had good lawyers and whatever, the opposing people, which was a large group, that if we ever owned the seed that went back into that water, we would have rights to be able to dive. And they blocked us from that with every means there was about, those could be infected seed. The seed was being grown right there in Santa Barbara, up away from the town, all the way up by Halama Beach. And so, and doing well, ready to be put in, but they wouldn't allow us to do it, even though it was already done once. But the question that you were asking, I kind of lost track.
They were active.
Oh, active. There was a
Central Coast abalone
there
divers
was
in the
50
90s.
When they closed it, there was 50 active abalone divers left.
That you could say were from the Central Coast area.
From this area here, there was about 6 or 8.
Okay.
From this area, I'm talking right here. In
Just
Santa Barbara and from San Diego ways down, there were several that had won their permits. There was a couple of old timers that were so old they jumped on my boat, and I allowed it for a couple, just so that they could get there.
Right,
and that was the 50.
So 1990s, you're really looking at 6 or 7 active divers.
Yes.
Yeah.
What about the 1980s?
Before that, it was up to 250, like I said. Earlier, before that, I'm 5 years or whatever in spans. If you broke it down into 5-year spans, their urchins were still, you know, they were making good money on urchins, but it really hadn't peaked out yet. But when it started to,
So
they
you're
all
talking
jumped
about
ship.
the 80s.
In the 80s, they couldn't help but make money at the sea urchin. So
Right.
they were divers already, so they just dropped doing abalones. They couldn't be competitive. When I went out there and they were going, holy
Okay, I'm
mackerel.
talking ab divers though.
Yeah, there was 250 permits. I never
Oh,
got
permits,
above that.
but how many would you really say, like in the Santa Barbara, Morro Bay area in the 80s were diving? Like you're saying in the 90s
50.
locally here.
I would say a total of 50
Okay.
that were out renewing their permits by picking,
Actually diving.
Okay.
actually diving. The ones that were making, you know, actually
And so
going
in
out.
the 80s.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that.
We also
Yeah.
had other
Steve was
things.
saying one or two.
Well, we also
Yeah.
put restrictions on how many abalones on a trip could you land.
Yeah.
And that was very important.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if I was the only diver on my boat, which I split dove with my nephew, getting him started, another Zartucci was another one. He's from Templeton area, good young kid, hard swimmer, and he split dove with me for over a year. He's got a family of old, you know, they dove forever, and he won his permit in a lottery, and was one of the lucky ones. And I signed him right on because he was
So
the
again,
right.
you're saying in the 80s,
Yeah. So
maybe 50.
yeah, well, there was 50 active. That's all that
50
was left.
active, yeah, in the Central Coast area, and that includes Santa Barbara,
So,
or just
It
Morro Bay?
includes the whole entire coastline of California. That's how
Okay,
many
so
permits were
about
left.
50.
It worked.
And-
That process of eliminating permits
Yeah.
worked.
And so, what would you say in the 80s? How many like Morro Bay guys were there? How many Santa-
Kenny Carnahan, myself, my nephew Bruce Flood. There was one other kid from San Luis Obispo. I can't remember his name. And then another local kid that bought a permit. So that's how many.
6.
There
So-
was 6 from San Luis in our local
Yeah.
area.
So
That's
6
it.
or 7 in the 80s.
Yep.
6 or 7 in the 90s.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.